Hey GBA fans, I'm Choice CJ, coming to you guys once again with the Game of the Week segment, followed by our Season Award Watch. And joining me, as always, I do have my partner in crime, Jamesanity.
Hello GBA fans.
And we will hop right on into our discussion. This was a pretty crazy week. There were several close games, quite a number of upsets. Why don't you go ahead and tell us, Mr. Jamesanity, what your Game of the Week is?
Okay, number one, don't call me Mr. Jamesanity. And number two, let's hop right into it. So I chose the New Orleans Pelicans, coached by Pokemon, versus the Detroit Steel Wings, coached by Crimson Seabad. And the main reason I chose this is because I think the prep on both sides was pretty amazing, and John's especially for the Volcarona. And you can see that right away, turn one, as the Jolteon has Hidden Power Rock specifically for the Volcarona, which was really nice and forced the Volcarona to switch out. Both the Slowbro and the Melodic carried Toxic, so it was a very poison-heavy game, but I think that was one of the better features of it. John, after damaging the Slowbro heavily with a Goodra Thunderbolt, actually predicted the Kyurem to come in and went for the Flamethrower, but the Kyurem lived on a itty-bitty tiny sliver of health, but it got burned, so it ended up dying to burn damage, which was really unfortunate, but I believe that was a roll anyway, so I don't think it mattered too much. Plus, at that tiny sliver of health, Kyurem could not have switched in on rocks once more, so again, I don't think it mattered too much. The Tornadus on Crimson's side eventually switches in on the Melodic after a Volt switch from the Cobalion, and the Melodic goes for the Toxic on the Tornadus, allowing the Melodic to drop to a very low point of health, but also allowing Crimson's Regenerator Core to be whittled even further by Toxic damage, and I do believe that was the right play because it ended up weakening the Regenerator Core, which allowed John to win the game in the end. But the low health Melodic was actually used later. It was used as crucial death fodder, saving John's Scolipede, which ended up dying, but still. And at the end of the game, as I said, both Scolipede and Slowbro died in the same turn, leaving a 1v1 situation with John's Infernape and Crimson's Cobalion. They were both base 108 speed, so there was potential for a speed tie, but John was Jolly Scarf Infernape and Crimson was Adamant Scarf Cobalion, so the Jolly Scarfed Infernape went for close combat and simply killed the Cobalion outright, leaving John with a very close yet well-deserved 1-0 win. I believe this was the closest game this week. I believe the prep was very amazing, and I believe the play was also pretty good. Not the best play I've ever seen, but the prep makes up for it.
Yeah, coming down all the way to the wire there for the Cobalion versus the Infernape. If it had been Jolly, obviously there would have been the opportunity for the speed tie, as you mentioned. Since the Infernape was at full health, I don't think there was any way Cobalion could have killed with the moveset that it had, save for a crit. But I agree with you, this game was pretty good. Very close 1-0, and as you mentioned, the prep was pretty good on both sides. The play, there were some plays that were kind of curious. Mainly what I'm thinking of is the turn 1 play with the Volcarona going straight for Quiver Dance. Volcarona could have done a lot of work versus John's team if the Goodra had been whittled down. But I understand him wanting to try and get off some early damage before rocks get up. The other thing that was weird was that the Volcanion didn't even outspeed, sorry, not the Volcanion, the Volcarona didn't even outspeed the Jolteon at +1 speed. I understand wanting to have the bulky Volcarona. It's also a pretty decent Bulu switch in with that quad resist if you can dodge the potential Stone Edge. But I thought putting a little bit of speed on there might have been a little bit better. Slowbro was a big nuisance this game. It got off Toxic on 4 different Pokemon, which I thought was wild. It got it off on Uxie, Melodic, Jolteon, and Goodra. Just from team preview, you could tell that Slowbro was going to be an issue. Jolteon was really the best thing that he had to deal with Slowbro. And then that thing took a big hit from Volcarona on turn 2. It got Toxic'd. I understand that Bulu had kind of a bad matchup this game, so that's why I couldn't come, but it would have been awfully nice to have that for the Slowbro. Melodic also, as you mentioned, got off a couple of Toxics on the Regenerator Core, so this was a very Toxic-heavy game, as you pointed out. So all in all, I can't disagree with your choice for Game of the Week here. I think this one's pretty cool. This is going to be the first week that we don't have a Utah Jasmine game, I believe, in the top Game of the Week, because my selection is Chimpact versus George, the Philadelphia Scizors versus the San Francisco Arcaniners. The reason I picked this was just sort of based on what the stakes were at the beginning of the game. So Chimpact had just knocked off the undefeated Tampa Bay Luxrays the week before. So he's sort of the newly minted king of the GBA, or at least the king of the moment. And George is the former champion on a little bit of a slide, 3-3 record in a virtual must-win scenario. And I think just based on team matchup that Chimp had the more favorable matchup. If his Thunderous had the opportunity to get up to +2, I think he pretty much won. Scarf Togekiss, I guess, could have potentially prevented that with like a Scarf Dazzling Gleam or something like that. But if Thundy's at a decent amount of health, it can take one of those, and obviously Oko with the Thunderbolt. George also didn't have anything for Kyurem Black. In his defense, no team really has anything for Kyurem Black, so it's hard to blame him for that. But Kyurem Black really put in work this week, getting KOs on Suicune, Togekiss, and Garchomp. I really loved the Roost set, just because it allowed him to take on that Suicune extremely well. You know, this is probably the most productive game for Kyurem Black so far this season coming out of Chimpact. I really liked the Scarf Togekiss. It put a lot of pressure onto Chimp's team. Chimp could have maybe played around it a little bit better, and he did allude to this in his video. As soon as he identified that it was Scarf and it came in on the Kofag as it went for T-Spikes, Chimp was immediately wishing that he had clicked Knockoff instead of Toxic Spikes. And then 2 air slashes later, the Kofag went for Pain Split to try and get off a little bit of chip damage, but then that might have been another scenario where Knockoff might have been nice. Azumarill finally did score the Knockoff a few turns later, but the damage had sort of been done. I really liked the win conditions that George brought. The Calm Mind Mew was pretty threatening, and it had gotten to +1 boost. And if the Thunderous had not been packing the Black Hole Eclipse, Mew might have been able to finish the game off just right there. But the fact that it forced that Black Hole Eclipse opened the door for Specs Mismagius. And this is another sort of point of contention in the game for Chimp. He had Gligar in versus Garchomp. Garchomp went for Dragon Claw. It did kind of a minimal amount of damage, and the Garchomp was poisoned. So Chimp had the potential to spam Roost with the Gligar until the Garchomp ran out of HP, but instead he went for U-turn, expecting the Mismagius to come in, and he wanted to keep up the momentum. But unfortunately, because the Garchomp stayed in, he was forced to either go into Thundurus or Kyurem to try and deal with the Garchomp. He had kind of known all along that the Garchomp was probably Yachi Berry, but there was just a sneaking feeling in the back of Chimpact's mind that it was a Scarf Garchomp with rocks, and so it made it hard for him to want to go into Thundy and get off that HP Ice if he was expecting to be outsped. But as it was, the Garchomp was simply Yachi Berry, got off critical damage on Kyurem, and it opened up the door for Specs Mismagius to clean up. So it was sort of a perfect storm. I don't think Chimp played poorly at the end there. Even though like he could have made some different plays to win the game, I think it's hard to argue with a comeback like that where this Mismagius can get 3 kills to bring the game back from very narrow defeat. So that's kind of why I picked it.
I'd say the comeback is the main reason why I actually didn't pick the match. I feel it wasn't as close. I feel it felt like Chimpact could have really won at any moment, but he underprepped for the Mismagius. Like, looking at his team, there's very little that actually switches into his Specs Mismagius, other than maybe the Azumarill, but not really. And the Azumarill was already dead at that point, so that didn't really matter. One thing that you did mention was the Black Hole Eclipse on the Mew. I felt like that really could have sealed the coffin in for George, but the Mismagius just kind of stepped up and did its thing, and I don't really think this was a bad match at all. It takes an easy number 2, but I still feel that John versus Crimson was better.
For all of you guys who are watching, please make sure to go down to the comment section below and tell us what you think of our choices, and make sure you make your case for which game was the game of the week. Now we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the second segment of our show where we launch into the Season Award Watch. So as we do each week, we look at the top candidates for Offensive Mon of the Season, Defensive Mon of the Season, and Coach of the Season. Why don't you go ahead and kick things off with our Offensive Mon?
So, first and foremost is Cobalion of the Detroit Steel Wings. It got another kill this week, adding on to its amazing kill record of 14. It's leading the pack by 4 kills, so obviously it's going to be first on our list. Next is still going to be Volcanion, but we do have to mention that it hasn't been brought 2 weeks in a row, so we're starting to worry a little bit about its placement on this list. Surprisingly, Chimp lost this week, So maybe that's because of Volcanion, who knows? But another mon that we mentioned last week was Crocodile. It wasn't brought this week either, but it still has 10 kills, however, so it's still in the race for Offensive MVP of the season. And finally is our newcomer, Swellow, from the Utah Jasmine. It got 4 kills this week, pretty much launching it into contention for this award, as well as 2 kills last week, totaling 6 kills in 2 weeks, which is pretty nice. So we had to include it for mainly that reason. It has the same kill count as Crocodile currently, and 1 less death, if I'm correct. So,
well, then I will transition us into the defensive mon of this season. I still feel like the number 1 in this category is Melodic. Melodic did really well this week, getting off crucial toxic damage on both the Slowbro and the Tornadus, whittling down that Regenerator core. And Melodic was also really pivotal in walling the Cobalion and the Kyurem this week from the Detroit Steel Wings. So that lands at my number 1. Number 2 is, I think, a little bit further behind. I'm going to put Pyukumugu here. This week it didn't serve such a pivotal role as it has in previous weeks, gaining really important momentum, but it did set up a light screen versus the Slowking, which was nice. And then later on in the match, it was able to baton pass into Galvantula. And then last, I'm still going to include Zapdos here. Zapdos has had 2 weeks off, and I think it's a little bit in danger of slipping out of contention. It's obviously done very well this season, especially in earlier weeks, but it's just, you know, it's this is a what have you done for me lately league, and Zapdos needs to come back soon and show us just how good it is, serve as a reminder of just how dangerous of a Pokemon that is. And that's going to be my top 3. I have my eye on a few other Pokemon, such as Slowbro, that could potentially sneak into here, but for the moment, I'm happy with these 3.
Alright, moving into our last category, the Coach of the Season, we have mainly one option, and that's the top record in the league, the San Diego Chimchargers, coached by Lord MV himself. They're on a 6-game win streak, which is the highest in the GBA, as well as having the highest record at 6-1. And the highest differential as well. Chimp, I'm sorry, but you did not live up to my challenge from last week, so I could not put you here. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Chimp is pretty sorry too. I'm sure he would have been much happier if he was able to beat George. And this really opened the door for Mono as well. I had said last week, if Chimp knocks off, I'll have no hesitation about bumping Mono back into this spot, but he had a very narrow loss himself. I almost picked that game as game of the week. It came down to I guess you could call it a roll at the end, that the fact that the Greninja could only get 2 hits with the Water Shuriken versus the Terrakion. I don't know if it's fair to call it hacks or not, but there was a percentage of the time where Mono was going to win that, and then a percentage of the time where it was going to lose that. So it is what it is. Alas, we are left with Lord MV in the D+ San Diego Chimchargers, although I think these days he's going to be getting a lot better grades than that D+ he earned at the start of the season. Keep up the good work, man. We all love watching you and love seeing the heat sets. That is going to finish up our video here. I do want to thank you guys for watching, as always. If you enjoy the video, make sure you drop a like. And if you want to watch more videos like this one, and you want to keep up to date on the power rankings and other great videos that the GBA panel puts out, you can go ahead and click that sub button right below. And make sure you check out all of our fantastic coaches, so that way you can get all of the latest action in your sub box each Sunday. Any last words?
No, other than another challenge to Chimp. Can you make it back?
I bet he'd like to think so, and we're all going to be rooting for him, and of course for every other coach. So that'll do it for us. Thank you guys for watching, and until the next time, we'll see you guys later.